Welcome. In today's episode, you're going to learn all about shapes in Adobe Illustrator. First thing you're going to do is you're going to need to open up a new document. Now I'm going to have you open up a document that's going to help you out in a later project for a postcard. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to open up Adobe Illustrator. Next, what you'll need to do is you will need to go to Create New. Depending on what version of Illustrator you're using, it may look a little different. In 2020, there's a little Create New version on the side. And then all the versions, though, you can always go up to File and New, and then a little box will pop up that you can create your new. Or if you have this button, you can just click Create New here, and it'll take you straight to your document. Now for this, we're going to set up a postcard size document. So I'm going to click on the Print tab. Now you'll notice it has several pre-selected sizes, and depending on your version, there's even some templates. We're not going to worry too much about the templates and things like that. We're going to create our own. So over here, I'm going to change the points to inches, and I'm going to change the orientation to landscape. For a postcard, I'm going to do probably a 4x6. 4x6 is a pretty standard size for postcards. So I'm going to change my width to 6 inches and my height to 4. Now, since I'm doing a postcard, we do need to have a front and back. So I'm going to change my artboards to 2. So then I will have an artboard for the front and an artboard for the back. Now, here where it says bleed is preset to 0. I'm actually going to add a bleed of 1/8 of an inch. That's 0.125. Now you'll notice that it did 1/8 of an inch on all 4 sides, and that's perfect. That's what we want. So now I'm going to click Create, and I'm going to explain what the bleed is here in a minute. So here is the front of my postcard. Here is the back of my postcard. Now you'll notice that this red line, that is your bleed. When you're creating anything for print and you have a colored background, you need to extend your color past the edge of the printable area. And we do this so that way when the paper is actually cut down to size, you don't have a weird white edge around. So this is specifically for when you are sending your files to print. So it's a good habit to get into. So basically our background color will be stretched to the bleed, but all of our important information will not go past that area because we don't want it to get trimmed off. Now, we're going to be learning about shapes. So you have set up your new document for your postcard. And for your postcard, you can create it however you want. But to help you out, I'm going to show you how to create some pretty cool shapes and use the Pathfinder tool. So here is our shape tool. I'm going to click on this. You might have the rectangle tool up to start with. But if you click on your rectangle tool or your tool panel here, and you click on this little arrow, it allows you to drag the tool panel out. I'm going to go ahead and drag that out. Now I have my align tools here. I'm going to keep that up. If you don't have this little section here at the bottom showing, if you click on these 3 little lines and click show options, it will pop up. You also are going to want to go up to Windows and open up your Pathfinder tools. And I'm going to drag those out here as well. So I have my align tools, my shapes, and my Pathfinders. These are probably the 3 most important things when you're working with any kind of real design other than like text and maybe your pen tool. So these are 3 really important tool sets that you're going to be using for your first project. So for our shape tools, we have some pretty basic shapes. We have our rectangle or square. Now, if you just click and drag, it will create your shape. Now you'll notice here up top on our control panel, we have our fill and our stroke. Stroke is the term used for outline. So right now our fill is white and our stroke is black. And our stroke is 1 point. That is actually the weight or the thickness of your stroke. So if I increase the weight, you'll notice that the stroke gets thicker. You can also click here and change your colors of any of your shapes. Now, I have a rectangle, but let's say I want to draw a perfect square. If you click and drag and hold down the Shift key, you will actually draw a perfect square. The next tool that we have is a rounded corner tool. So we can draw our rectangles, and we can also click and hold Shift, and it will draw a perfect square. Now you'll notice a difference in our normal square and this square is the placement of these little dots. So here we have the dots closer to the corner. Here they're a little bit further away. These actually are controls that allow us to adjust the rounded edges. So if you want more rounded, almost like a circle, or less rounded, see how that just has a slight round to it? You can actually take any square or rectangle that you've drawn and you can actually round the corners simply by dragging them in. And then you can drag it all the way out and it'll create a square again. Same thing with our rounded edges. So you can transform these back and forth. It's a really nice thing to be able to do because maybe you drew a square and then you decide later on that you want the corners rounded, and instead of having to draw the whole shape again, you can just click on it and drag the corners in. Now you'll notice it says R. That is your radius. That is the radius of your square, and it's inches because that's what we're working with right now. So if we do 0.25, this is a 1/4 inch radius. This is a pretty small square, so the 1/4 inch radius looks pretty large. If we were to draw, let's say, a 12 inch square, 12 inch by 12 inch, a 1/4 inch radius would be a lot smaller. The next tool that we have is our ellipse tool. Now the ellipse tool allows you to create ovals, or if you hold down Shift, it allows you to create circles. Now, one neat thing about this tool is you'll notice that there's this little circle that sticks out. This little circle, you notice when I go up to it and I hover over it, there's this little tiny Pac-Man symbol that appears next to my cursor. This little Pac-Man symbol actually allows you to click and drag, and you can create angles. Now, if you hold down Control, it kind of moves the handle out where you just see it on the outside, and it just allows you to rotate the shape. But if you don't hold down Control, it allows you to adjust the handle, and you could actually create little Pac-Man shape. Or, for instance, if I click on, I'm going to grab my selection tool here. If I click on my oval up here, I can click and drag this all the way around to 180 and cut my circle perfectly in half, or my oval perfectly in half. I could do the same thing to a circle, hold down Shift, grab, and go all the way to 180 and have half of a circle pretty easily. So this is a really nice tool because you can quickly change up the shape of your circle to create multiple shapes. The next tool we have is our polygon tool. If you click and drag, you'll notice that it rotates larger and smaller. If you hold down Shift, it keeps it stationary. Now this polygon tool, usually when you first use it, it has 6 sides to it. Now you can actually add and subtract sides. So if I grab my polygon tool again, and I click and I drag, I can actually, before releasing the mouse, if I push on the up arrow, I add more sides, and if I press the down arrow, I subtract sides, all the way down to a triangle. So you can easily create a triangle that way, or you can add sides, 7, 8, make an octagon, straighten it out. Now let's say you are creating your shape and you accidentally add too many sides to this. Now if we grab this guy, it does the same thing the corners do, it rounds it. Or if you hover right over this little tiny dot right here, maybe if I zoom in, I'm hovering right there. See how there's a plus and minus sign? You can click that and drag out. Sorry, it did not work. Click the plus sign and drag in, and it creates less sides. So see how it's going 5 sides, 6 sides, 7 sides. So you can kind of drag it around. So I started with 8, 7, 6. It's not the easiest thing to control, but it is a way for you to adjust your shapes without having to draw a whole new shape. The next one is your star tool. Now this one you can create your star. Usually it has 5 points starting. You can hold down Shift and it will keep your star stationary. You can press the up arrow and add points, or the down arrow and subtract points. You can also hold Alt and it allows your star to get bigger with shorter points, or you can hold down Control and it'll allow the points to get really large like snowflakes. So you can continue to play around with the star tool to create multiple different stars, add and subtract the sides, and just kind of adjust as you go. So pretty versatile. The flare tool is an interesting tool that we don't see used often, maybe in some backgrounds. It literally creates this kind of flare as if you are staring into a camera or kind of a reflection. So it's kind of a nice texture for a background, but most people don't really use the flare tool. So we have all of these different shapes that you can use. And I did briefly mention about the stroke and the fill color. And so we're going to get a little bit more into that. But first I'm going to actually open up the stroke panel. So if you go to Windows and you go down to Stroke, it actually opens up this stroke panel. I'm going to drag it out over here. I'm going to right click here, not right click, and it's going to open up all these tools. Now this is pretty neat. So I'm going to drag this over here just so we can work with this rectangle. You can simply click on your shape and you can adjust the stroke here. Now you also have some pretty interesting things here, some caps. This is how, if you had a shape that came to an end, what it would look like. So for instance, if I had used this line tool, I can round the ends or have the ends go just past the points. So the caps are really good for shapes that come to points or ends, kind of like our star here. You can kind of round it. It's not doing much on this one, but it will work on your lines. So we don't use the caps too often with our normal enclosed shapes. You can also round the corners here or bevel the corners where they have flat edges. Another interesting thing you can do with shapes, you see this blue line? Right now this blue line, that is the bounding box of your shape. That is right in the center of your stroke, of your outline. So here it says align stroke. You'll see that the actual line of the stroke is in the center. We can move the line of the stroke to where the stroke is actually inside the box, or we can move it on the outside, kind of like a frame. So it's really nice that you can do any of these things. You can also take a line here and you can change it into arrows, different directions, things like that. And we'll get more into your dashed lines and whatnot. You can even just simply click the dashed line and you'll see that. But we'll get more into that at a later time. Right now we're more focused on the shapes. So you can very easily change the fill to anything you want and the stroke to any color you want. Now there's some predetermined or pre-selected colors up here for you, but if you don't want any one of those colors, you just simply click on the shape you want to change color, and here you have your fill and your stroke. If you double click, you can change the color to anything you want. Same with the stroke. You can double click and change it to anything you want. This little arrow here allows you to switch the colors back and forth. So if you want a pink fill and a green outline, or if you want a green fill and a pink outline. If you want to just revert back to the standard black and white, you can just click on that it will also reset your stroke back to 1. The last thing I want to show you is actually how to use the Pathfinder tool. Now this tool is pretty interesting. So the Pathfinder tool has a few options here. We have our unite, our minus front, our intersect, our exclude, our divide, our trim, our merge, our crop, our outline, and our minus back. I'm going to kind of show you what each of these do. But first, I'm going to clear all this away. I'm going to grab my ellipse tool, and I'm going to create some shapes. Now I created one circle. If you click on that circle and you hold down Alt, it allows you to actually make a copy. If you'll notice my selection arrow, which is the black arrow, when I hold down Alt and hover, it changes to 2 arrows. So I'm going to change this. If you don't want a stroke, an outline, all you have to do is click this little white box with a red line, and then that means that you have no fill. So for right now, I'm going to work with no stroke and just 3 different colored boxes so you can, or circles, so you can see how they work with each other in this tool. So I'm going to click no fill. Okay. So I'm going to click and drag and select all 3 shapes. I'm going to hold down Shift. I'm going to shrink them, bring them over. I'm going to make 1, 4 copies. I'm going to show you each one of those. See how I'm simply just selecting what I want, holding down Alt, and I can make multiple copies. Okay, in this first set, I'm going to grab all 3 circles, and I'm going to use our unite. Now, if you'll notice, we went from 3 separate shapes to 1 shape. The shape that's on top, it changed it to all the colors. So we had the yellow circle on top, so all 3 became yellow. If I do Control Z and I undo what I did, and I click on this shape, I right click on this shape, and I go to Arrange, Bring to Front. Now the pink circle is on top. If I select all of the items again and unite, it'll turn it to pink. So whatever shape is on top, it uses those color settings for when it unites them. So unite literally does what it says. It united all 3 shapes into 1 shape. So now there's no more lines in the center. They're not separate shapes. It's all 1 shape. Our next tool, this is minus front. Select them all and click minus front. So you'll notice it took the shape in the back, which was the blue one, and it subtracted or cut the shapes out of that using the 2 shapes on top. So it basically used the 2 shapes on top as kind of like cookie cutters and cut away. This is a great way of making, like, let's say like a crescent moon. If you want to go like that and kind of create something like that where you get that perfect cut. So for right now, I'll show you what it looks like with both of them. So that is the minus front. So you're literally subtracting the front from the shape in the back. The next one is actually intersect. So wherever it intersects, it will disappear. So you'll notice our 3 shapes is kind of like almost like a Venn diagram. You have this shape cutting over, that shape cutting over. So what it does is it takes all the shapes where all 3 shapes intersect and overlap, and it saves those. So if we select all 3 and cut the intersects, that's all we have left. Control Z to undo. Let's say I just take the pink and the blue, intersect that, it will cut what's left. And this would actually be a great way to create some petals around the center of this flower. So you can create some pretty interesting shapes that way. So I will show you what that does there. The next one is exclude. So let's select all 3 shapes and click exclude. So any place that they are overlapping, it excludes and cuts out. So another interesting way to create some fun shapes. Now these other ones down here, these Pathfinders, they get a little bit more complicated. I'm going to select the 3 here, and I'm going to click on this one. This is divide. Divide literally cuts wherever lines cross. So if I click divide, it doesn't look like it did much. But if you right click and ungroup, that's the key, now I have separate shapes. Everywhere it intersected, there's separate shapes. So that's divide. Now the thing about divide is as soon as it actually divides it, it groups it, which means it kind of creates everything together. So see how you can create something pretty cool with that. So all you have to do is simply right click and ungroup it. And I'll show you how to do grouping in a second. So the next one, clicked all 3. This one is trim. So we select that, and we notice how it kind of groups it together. Right click, ungroup. And this one just trims where there's the overlap. So this one cut all the lines. This one just trimmed the shapes a little bit. So a little bit different there. Kind of a cool way of showing, putting some spacing in there. Select the next 3. This one is merge. Merge is similar to unite. However, you'll notice unite blobbed them all together as one color, one shape. Merge, what it does is it created one shape, but it kept them together. Now I ungrouped it, so it still kept the individual shapes, but all that overlap mess is gone. So if you ungroup, they're still separate pieces. So technically the result is pretty much similar to the trim tool. Alright, our next 3. Select all 3. This is going to be our crop. So whichever one is on top, it uses that kind of as a cookie cutter to crop and cut out the other shapes. So if we click on our pink shape, right click, go to arrange, bring to forward, and we do it again, it uses that shape. So whatever shape is on top, it uses to actually trim. Alright, next one. Outline. You'll notice it kind of does this really rough outline. Kind of looks a little bit of a mess, but basically just outlines all of your shapes. Not the cleanest tool, and it's actually not used very often in my experience. Next 3 shapes. Alright, last one. Minus back. Very similar to the minus front, but this time the 2 in the back will be taken from the 1 in the front. So if you remember this one over here, we minus the front. It's same thing, just with the 1 in the back instead of the 1 in the front. So there we go. So those are all of our shape modes and our Pathfinder tools using your shapes. Pretty interesting ways to create shapes, some custom shapes, and have a lot of fun. So that pretty much covers all of the shape tools, the shape modes, the Pathfinders. We started to talk about and get into the stroke and the weight of each shape. You can use your align tools that you learned before, how to actually line up certain objects and things like that. Real quick on grouping, when you have a complicated piece like this where it's multiple pieces and you want them to all stay together because you have it laid out perfectly, it can get a little irritating when you try to move something around. You have to always constantly click and drag, move it over, and if you accidentally set it on top of another shape, now when you go to click and drag, that shape's involved. So what you do is you click and drag and you right click and go to group, or if you click and drag and do Control G will actually group it. And what grouping does is when you click on it, now it creates one shape. It just kind of groups them together and locks them in so you can easily move them around. And then if you ever want to ungroup them, because you need to move the individual pieces around, you can either right click and go to ungroup, or you can do Shift Control G. And now you have individual parts again. Grouping really helps with Illustrator because sometimes you're working with a lot of different parts, and it's really nice to group them together so things that are supposed to stay together always stay together. All right, and that is it for shapes.